Elias Dara and his wife, Marius Sela, exited the bus with smiles on their faces as the warm wind off the Caribbean Sea brushed against them as they stepped onto the resort's grounds. They followed their fellow travelers towards the check-in desk while the resort staff began to unload the luggage from the bus. As Elias followed behind them, hand in hand with his wife, he smiled as he thought about how his vacation was going to be far different than that of the other travelers that had exited the bus with him. Halfway towards the door, Elias heard a familiar voice calling out to him and Marius Sela. "Aunt Eva," Marius Sela shouted as she ran over and embraced her. "How are you, dear?" Eva asked her niece before Elias came over and gave the woman a hug as well. "I hope you are quite prepared for what I have planned for you," Eva said to Elias with a smile as he stepped away from her. Elias nodded as he replied with a grin, "I can't wait to get started." "I bet you can't." "I bet you can't," Eva said with a smile before she rolled her eyes and shook her head a little. Elias blushed, knowing how strange Eva felt his relationship with Marius Sela was. Despite that, she was more than willing to help them live out one of Elias's fantasies. Eva looked to Elias and Marius Sela and asked, "Are you really sure you want to do this?" Marius Sela answered for him, "He'd better be sure after we came all this way." Elias smiled and nodded at his wife's aunt before Eva replied, "Okay, then follow me, dears." "Thank you again for everything, Aunt Eva," Marius Sela said as Eva began to lead them away from the vacationers. "It will be my pleasure. Free labor is not an insignificant benefit for me in my busy time of year, dear." Elias nodded as he followed her, knowing that his wife's aunt was talking about him. His mind drifted back to when they approached Eva to ask her to help Elias live out his fantasy. Eva was surprised, to say the least, that her niece's accountant husband wanted to work as a laborer at the resort she inherited from her late husband. As she was still processing that idea, Elias and Marius Sela explained further what type of role he was looking to fill for her. Elias remembered with a smile the surprised shout that Eva let out when Marius Sela told her aunt that Elias wanted to work as one of the maids at the resort. Eva simply could not believe what she was hearing. Having both anticipated this, Marius Sela nodded for Elias to show her aunt how they often were in private. Elias retreated to the guest bedroom that Marius Sela half-jokingly referred to as the maid's quarters. While during the week Elias was her husband who shared their bedroom, during their quiet weekends, Elias would spend his entire weekend in dresses, nylons and aprons, toiling as his wife's personal maid. As he looked into his closet at his maid's uniforms, Elias selected one of the more understated uniforms that he actually worked in. While he possessed fetish uniforms complete with petticoats and layers of lace, he only wore those when he served his wife in the evening hours to invite her touch and playful bottom pats. Elias took hold of a plain, button-up front, gray dress with thin white vertical stripes. He placed it on the bed as he removed his pants and made sure that his member was firmly tucked away in the panties and nude nylons that he had been wearing beneath his pants. After taking off his shirt, Elias removed one of his bras from the cheap white dresser that contained his female undergarments. He put the white bra on and stuffed it before he placed the dress on. Elias buttoned up the front of the dress and turned his attention to the makeup that was in front of the vanity mirror that rested on top of the dresser. Elias then put on his understated light pink lipstick after he applied his foundation to smooth out the tones of his tanned face. He then turned his attention to his eyes and took hold of his eyelash curler. He reached for the hairdryer he kept in the room and briefly turned it on to heat the eyelash curlers for a few seconds. Elias then touched the warm curler to the eyelashes above his right eye and clamped it down for 30 seconds before he repeated his action with his left eye. With the makeup regimen he perfected with his wife's help complete, Elias removed his long black hair from its low ponytail. While he was sometimes teased at work for his hair, his bosses never raised any objections they may have had towards it given Elias's expertise and sterling work ethic. Elias put the rubber band that had been holding his hair up on the counter and took hold of a white hair tie and put his hair up into a high ponytail. Elias then added a plain, white elastic headband to his hair. After admiring his feminized appearance for a few seconds, as he often found himself doing once he finished getting ready to be his wife's maid, Elias turned and walked towards the closet. He put on a pair of his black, formal dress shoes with a 1-inch block heel that he wore when he served his wife dinner. After he finished sliding his feet into them, he headed for the doorway. Elias felt a fluttering feeling in his stomach while he walked through the hallway, since Eva was the first person he was going to be showing his feminized appearance to besides his wife. He heard his wife and her aunt talking as he walked down the staircase of their colonial-style home. He thought about turning around and running back into the room and changing back into his male clothing and leaving Eva's conception of him as a cross-dressing maid to her own imagination. Mariasela, however, heard Elias's heels on the wooden staircase and called for him to join them in the living room. Elias felt his heart racing as he walked down the final steps and turned the corner that faced the formal living room in the front of the home. Eva stared at Elias with a slightly agape jaw while he slowly walked towards her. Mariasela smiled at her stunned aunt as she said, "Aunt Eva, I'd like you to meet my maid, Elena." Eva took a sip of the drink in her hand before she replied, charmed, as she gazed at Elias. It was only Elias's distinctive bone structure that let her believe that her niece was telling the truth about the maid standing before her. After a few seconds of silence, Mariasela asked, "Aunt Eva, do you need your drink refreshed?" Eva nodded as she continued to gawk at Elias. "Elena, please be a dear and pour us 2 more drinks," Mariasela said. Elias nodded and said, "Right away, mademoiselle." Eva started to laugh as Elias took the glass from her as she said, "Mademoiselle? Now, I know you two are putting me on. Still, great work with him. I almost can't, oh my god. You're serious, aren't you?" Mariasela and Elias looked at each other for a second before Mariasela motioned for Elias to get the drinks. Elias scurried out of the room and made the 2 drinks as Mariasela assured her aunt that they were not trying to play a trick on her. As Elias re-entered the room and handed the ladies their drinks, Eva asked, "So, Elena, I'm told that you always call my niece Mademoiselle. That's what the lady of the home wants to be called, Senora Castillo." "Senora Castillo," Eva repeated with a laugh. "Senora Castillo, Mademoiselle always makes me refer to ladies we know as Miss, but you're a special case." "What about men?" Eva asked as she took a sip with a smile. "I preface their surnames with Master, Senora Castillo." Eva laughed as she rubbed her forehead with her right hand before she moved the drink to her lips with her left hand. "So what do you think?" Mariasela asked her aunt. "You're both nuts," Eva replied with a grin and a laugh as she swallowed her drink. Mariasela smiled and paused before she responded, "Perhaps, but what do you think of my maid? Would you know that she's packing something special in her panties, if you didn't know Elias?" Eva laughed as she replied, "No. I almost can't believe that's Elias underneath all that makeup and padding." "And what about her voice?" "Her? That's right, you called him a she. What else would I call a maid?" Mariasela interjected. Eva shook her head as she asked Elias, "You're really okay with this?" "I love it, Senora Castillo," Elias replied with a quick bob. Eva laughed again as she replied, "To each their own, I suppose. Different strokes for different folks," Mariasela responded. "I guess, and I suppose your husband's no weirder than Sly Stone is, or Gary Coleman was." "Aunt Eva, we try to keep a clear distinction between Elias and Elena. Elias is my husband. When you see this lovely lady before us in a uniform, however, she's just my maid, Elena. So, when he's like that you don't, how do I put this? If you're asking about sex, Elena only pleasures me like the lovely lesbian lover she is." Eva almost spit out her drink as she heard her niece's response. After collecting herself, Eva answered, "I should have guessed as much given how far you two appear to have actually taken this." "Well, we'd like to take it a bit farther," Mariasela responded. "Right, Elena, Mariasela tells me that you want to work as one of my maids at the resort this winter. Is that true?" Eva asked Elias. Yes, Sonora Castillo, Elias answered. Eva shook her head and said, "There's nothing about you that I can see that gives you away. If I didn't know better, I'd assume you were born a woman. Your voice is unisex and your body's so thin. God, I wish I had legs like that, but then I probably wouldn't have this rack that my husband loves so much." "Well, do you think he can do it?" Maria Sela asked. Eva looked at Elias and said, "I think he can pass himself off as a woman, but I don't know if he can do the job." Maria Sela smiled as she said, "Look around you, Aunt Eva. Elena has kept this place spotless." Eva nodded to herself as she noticed the dust-free environment that Elias prided himself on creating. Maria Sela then added, "Maybe a little test is in order." Eva stared at her niece oddly as she ordered Elias about. Elias complied with her orders to the letter, prompting Eva to smirk and acknowledge that Elias was perfectly capable of working as a maid at her resort. With that acknowledgement, Eva and Maria Sela began working out a deal. Elias and Maria Sela were going to go to the resort for a week. Eva would stay in the hotel, where she always stayed when she went on vacation there, but Elias would be put to work with the help. Elias was excited as he heard them discussing their plans as he stood silently to the side with his hands clasped behind his back, ready to assist them at his wife's request. Elias's attention was drawn back towards the present while they walked past a restaurant and a swimming pool as Maria Sela and Eva continued to talk. They made a sudden turn as Eva began to lead them down a desolate path that veered away from the laughing people drinking in the view of the beachfront vista. The further they walked, the less impressive their surroundings became. Eva pointed to a remote building and said, "That's where you'll be staying, Elias." Elias nodded while he followed Eva into the stucco-covered building. As Elias entered, he saw the interior walls were nothing more than cinder blocks that had been painted in bright colors. The building was built strong, but Elias knew that it was utilitarian by design. The surroundings seemed far different from the ones he was accustomed to sharing with his wife at the resort when they had stayed there before. The walls in the corridor he walked through were painted a pale yellow, while the floor was simple gray concrete that contrasted with the marble floors in the hotel lobby and the pretty wallpapered walls that were framed by expensive molding. The Spartan nature of his surroundings mildly surprised Elias, but they also turned him on once he began to think about how different they were from the surroundings his wife would be enjoying that week. Eva then came to a stop in front of room and pushed open the wooden door. Elias peered inside and saw the 4 bunks in the room. There were 2 top bunks as well corresponding lower bunks. None of the beds seemed to Elias to be anything more than a simple cot. Elias entered the room and saw that there was a closet full of uniforms and some other clothing. Beneath the lower beds he saw 3 suitcases. Not long after he entered, one of the resort staff members carried over his bag that had been removed from the vacationer's baggage area. Elias opened the bag and took out his makeup and hair care supplies as Eva explained which dresses in the closet were procured for him. Elias nodded as he walked into the adjoining bathroom with one of them in his hands as well as the other articles of clothing that Maria Sela handed him before he got ready at Eva's insistence. Elias disrobed quickly before he rested on the closed toilet seat. He rolled down his nylon/lycra tights and placed his feet into them before he unrolled the black opaque tights up his legs. Elias smiled at the feeling on his hairless legs that he had grown accustomed to over the years, but he still relished it whenever he experienced it. After tucking away his member in the control top tights, Elias took hold of his bra. He hooked it before he put his arms through the straps and brought it down over his head and across his chest. Elias pulled at the straps as he straightened the bra out of over his chest before he stuffed it with his breast forms. Elias then covered his false bust with the button-up black, knee-length maid's dress. Elias smiled in the mirror at the dress's white cuffs on its short sleeves. The sound of Eva's impatient sighing on the other side of the door broke Elias's concentration on his own appearance. Elias fixed his hair into a high ponytail as he did at his home the first time Eva had seen him en femme. When he finished putting his hair up, Elias put on his makeup and came back out to talk with his wife and Eva. As Elias emerged from the bathroom, he saw the smile on his wife's face. Elias asked his wife, "What do you think?" Before she could answer, Eva interjected, "Elena, I think now is a good time to go over the rules." Elias nodded before Eva continued, "First off, Mariasila is a guest at my resort. At my resort, the help do not speak to the guests unless they're spoken to. Are we clear?" Elias bit his lip and nodded as he felt a stirring in his tights as he listened to his wife's aunt talk down to him while he stood before he dressed as a maid. Eva smiled and said, "Good. I'm not doing this to be a bitch, dear. I just don't want your little game to screw up my business, understood?" "Yes, Senora Castillo. That's another thing, Elena. Here, you call the guests sir and madam if you are addressed. The help you can call by their names, and here, as you know, I am known by the help as Senora Castillo. Can you keep all that straight?" "Yes, Senora Castillo. That's a good girl," Eva responded. Eva's response made Elias's member swell between his legs before she continued, "Now, as far as your quarters, Elena, it should be obvious to you that you're sharing it with 3 other girls here. They're all from the island, and they have been advised that you are not. They've been told that I found you abroad and was quite pleased with your work and offered you a tryout for a job here. Of course, this tryout will only last a week until you're terminated, as the story will go." Elias nodded as Eva further explained, "This week, however, you're just one of our many maids here. Your tasks will be set by your supervisor, who you are to report to when we're done here. Your supervisor's name is Susie Cruz. I expect you to follow Susie's orders as you would my niece's or my own. Am I understood?" "Yes, Senora Castillo," Elias replied dutifully. "Now, if you look at the back of the bathroom door, you will notice that there's a sign-up sheet. You have to reserve your time in the bathroom each evening and night. I'll sign you up for the last one of the night as the earlier slots have already been taken. You must be careful in these quarters, Elena. I expect you to keep your secret. If it got out, it would be most embarrassing for yourself and me, and if you embarrass me after I helped you live this fantasy out, I assure you, I'm going to send you back to the airport and through customs in that dress. Got it?" Elias started to feel a strange mix of fear and arousal as he nodded to his wife's aunt to acknowledge her threat. Eva nodded at Elias and handed him a gray bib apron from the closet. Elias slipped his arms through the shoulder straps before he tied the straps behind his back to secure it in place. Eva looked Elias over before she turned towards Mariasila and said, "She certainly looks the part, dear. This just might work." Elias gave Eva an odd stare before she told him to put on his casual work shoes. Elias nodded and pulled his suitcase out from under the bed. He took hold of his white Keds and slipped his feet into the canvas shoes. Elias then put his makeup bag into the suitcase and pushed it back under the bed. As he stood up, Eva said, "Are you ready to meet, Susie?" Elias nodded before Eva led him out of the quarters. They walked out of the building and back towards the guest area of the resort compound. As the pool came into view, Eva turned to Mariasila and said, "Dear, you can go hang out by the pool. My people already signed you in and put your bags in your room. I've got your hotel key, and I'll meet you by the pool when I'm done with Elena." Mariasila smiled and said, "That sounds great." Elias watched as Mariasila walked away from them as they continued on towards another building. Elias caught Mariasila looking back at them for a moment before she smiled and kept on walking towards the pool where she would relax with the other guests while he began his week of servitude for strangers. Eva led Elias through a rear entrance of the hotel. As Elias followed her into the building, he looked around at the dank hallway and noticed that, like his quarters, it was of a utilitarian design. Elias figured that the building must be made of the same material as his quarters and was merely dolled up elsewhere for the aesthetic pleasure of the guests. Elias followed Eva down the corridor and was taken into a small office that was cooled by an oscillating fan. As he walked in, he saw a middle-aged woman look up at him. Eva addressed her and said, "Susie, this is the new girl I've told you so much about. In a thick accent, Elias heard the woman reply, "Elena, it's great to meet you." Elias shook her hand and said hello to the woman before Eva dismissed herself to let Susie get him ready for his first tasks around the facility. As Eva left the building, Susie looked Elias over and nodded before she said, "Elena, did Senora Castillo go over the rules with you?" "Yes," Elias replied. "Okay. I'm guessing she went over the basics. There's other things though. First off, you are not to take any tips from the guests. If you do, you're fired. Secondly, there's no dating guests. We've had our trouble with girls getting seduced and sleeping with them. Just trust me. They're not going to take you home with them when they leave." Elias nodded and thought to himself, if you only knew. Susie then went over a number of the other rules before she told Elias to head over to the restaurant. Elias got to his feet and walked out of the building. He strolled towards the restaurant. As he walked through the door, he saw the staff starting to get the place ready for the lunch crowd. Elias asked around to see what was expected from him. Elias was then pointed to a woman named Jackie. Elias reported over to her and asked what she wanted him to do. Jackie responded by telling him to vacuum the rug. Elias nodded and went to where Jackie told him the vacuums were kept in the restaurant. Elias took one out of the storage closet and plugged it in. Elias began to clean around the tables and underneath them and the chairs, vacuuming the various crumbs that had fallen to the floor from the breakfast crowd. Elias vacuumed around the room without any real attention being drawn to him. Elias enjoyed the anonymity he felt cleaning beside the other girls who went about their tasks with very little conversation. As the lunch hour grew near, however, Eva and Maria Sela entered the restaurant. An audible hush was heard by Elias as he turned and saw Eva walking through the room. Elias could see the fear and reverence that the staff felt towards her. Elias knew that the cleaning women and busboys he was surrounded by needed their jobs and could not risk running afoul of her. Their work was diligent before she entered the room, but Elias noticed that they seemed to take their work to another level as she walked around and inspected their workmanship. Eva examined the cleanliness of the room and how the busboys set up each table as Maria Sela followed behind her in tow. As they made their way past him, Maria Sela smirked at Elias. She briefly stopped next to him and lightly took the edges of his apron in her hand. Elias stared into her eyes as she gently pulled at his apron to straighten it out before she let it go. Elias continued to stare into her eyes before she winked and smiled. Elias stood still as Maria Sela walked on while Eva went to address the staff workers in the kitchen. Elias felt excited about his silent exchange with his wife. He knew that she seemed as pleased with his situation as he did, perhaps even more so. There was still a part of Elias, however, that nagged that there was something wrong about what he was doing. Even though he had played a similar role with his wife for years, the doubts about whether Maria Sela could still respect him after seeing him work as a hotel maid that he had when Maria Sela pitched the idea to her aunt returned to the forefront of his mind. Elias shook his head as he realized that he had been standing around in a stupor since his wife walked away from him and was drawing some attention to himself from the other staff workers. Elias returned to cleaning the restaurant before he was ordered to clean the hallways of the hotel. Elias took his orders in stride and walked back to the hotel building and found where the vacuum cleaners for the halls were kept. He then began the time-consuming task of vacuuming each of the hotel's long hallways. As he cleaned the hallways, various guests of the hotel walked past him. Elias could hear their conversations with each other and on their phones. Elias smiled as he noticed that no one seemed to pay him any attention while he did his work around the hotel. After he finished cleaning the hallways of the hotel, Susie walked over to Elias and said, "Elena, I hate to do this to you on your first day, but we need you to help out in the restaurant as we're a little short-handed today." Elias nodded and said, "Okay. Great. Thanks, Elena. Again, I'm sorry about it, but since you've worked less than a full day here, it's just a little more fair to have you do it than to ask one of the others girl who put in a full day's work." Elias nodded again as he replied, "You don't need to explain. I understand." Susie nodded and pointed Elias towards the door as she told him that she would put away the vacuum for him. Elias nodded and walked out of the hotel and towards the restaurant. Elias walked past the pool and looked into the pool area. He smiled as he saw his wife still basking in the late afternoon sunshine with a drink in her hand. She peered up at him and smiled before she motioned for the cabana boy to refill her drink. Elias shook his head as he wiped the sweat off his brow and kept walking towards the restaurant. Elias thought about the content look on his wife's face. She looked like she was enjoying herself and seemed to be enjoying that he was off working as one of the maids. Elias's mind continued to go over their situations repeatedly as he headed for the rear service entrance to the restaurant that he saw some staff members walking out of. The staff members acknowledged Elias and kept the door open for him. Elias walked inside and asked where he was needed. Elias was pointed towards the sink where 3 girls were cleaning and drying the dishes. Elias walked over to the sink. After Elias slipped his hands into a pair of latex gloves that were lying beside the sink, he looked around for direction and inquired regarding how he could assist the girls. Elias did not have to wait long before he was put to work at the sink as one of the girls moved over to the side to solely dry the dishes as they began to clean the dishes, glasses, and cutlery in an assembly line style. As he scrubbed the first few dishes, he felt the hot stickiness in the air of the kitchen. Elias was momentarily surprised by how hot it seemed. He quickly realized that he should have expected it, however, given that he was in a commercial Caribbean kitchen. The heat made Elias feel a little queasy as he cleaned the guests' plates in the warm water, but he soldiered on. As Elias continued to scrub the dishes in the sink, Mariasela walked into the kitchen with Eva. Elias noticed the staff perk up as Eva walked amongst them again. Elias was more interested in Mariasela's response, however. Mariasela smirked as she saw her husband standing amongst a group of people with his hands in yellow latex gloves and cleaning the dishes, glasses, and cutlery of the resort's guests. Elias put his head down as he felt an intense arousal by being seen by his wife as just one of the resort's employees working at the sink. Elias looked Mariasela over as he pulled a glass out of the sink. She was wearing one of the dresses he liked to see her in the most. It was a one-sleeved, mid-thigh length, off-white bandage dress showed off her flawless skin. The form-fitting dress further revealed her slender figure. Elias saw a few of the male employees in the kitchen sneaking looks at his wife, and he could not blame them. Regardless, they kept their mouths and their hands to themselves since they all knew that she was there with the boss. Elias himself had a hard time tearing his eyes away from her. He wanted to rip the dress right off and do whatever she wanted him to do to her, but he knew that he was going to spend the night alone in a cot while she retired to her king-size bed in one of the resort's luxury suites that Eva always reserved for her niece. One of the workers had to nudge Elias to get him back to work as his mind had drifted to thoughts about his wife. He blushed and apologized to the girl for losing his focus before he put the glass down for drying and began to scrub some plates. By the time he looked back up, Eva and Mariasela had left the building for the night. Elias continued to work in the kitchen for 2 more hours before he retired to his quarters. When he walked into his room, he saw 3 girls talking to each other in it. The girls paused to look at him for a second before they introduced themselves to him as Isolina, Marta, and Annabelle. Elias smiled and introduced himself as Elena. The girls noted that they had been told about him before he arrived. Elias worried about what they had heard. He wondered if Eva had told them his secret despite her warning to him early that morning. He knew it was a definite possibility, however, given the close quarters Eva knew he was going to be sharing with the girls. The girls gave no hint of knowing it though as Elias walked around the quarters and prepared to take a shower. Elias locked the bathroom door behind him and got into the shower. The warm water felt good on his skin as his body felt tired. Elias's head felt a little light as found himself frequently yawning while he washed himself. Elias stepped out of the shower and dried himself off before he put on 2 pairs of panties and a bra. Elias made sure to tuck himself away as best he could. He then put on his breastforms and bra before he covered his body with the cheap calico print, cotton nightgown his wife had purchased for Elena. As Elias stepped out of the bathroom, he noticed that the other 3 girls were already in their beds. Elias walked towards his and climbed under the covers. The effect of the day's labor crept up on him quick, and he fell asleep minutes after he pulled the covers over his body. Alarm in the room went off before dawn. Elias rubbed his eyes and made sure that he was still tucked before he forced himself out of the bed as the other girls arose in the room around him. Elias headed for the bathroom as his turn came and showered quickly before he dressed and put on his makeup for his first full day as a maid at the resort. Elias talked with Annabelle and Marta as Selena showered and got ready and asked where they went first thing in the morning. The girls advised that they had breakfast together in the basement of the hotel building before they began their workdays. While Elias knew that Eva provided her staff with meals in addition to quarters, he did not know that they all ate together. Elias waited for the other girls in his room to be ready before he walked over to the hotel with them. They picked up their breakfasts, which Elias could tell were cheaply thrown together. Elias looked around and noticed that the staff members were all sitting amongst others who did the same jobs as each other. Elias walked over with the girls to where the hotel maids were sitting and he situated himself amongst them. Elias ate his breakfast and listened to the girls' small talk before he cleaned his tray and joined the other maids to hear their assignments for the day. Elias listened as Susie instructed the staff and told him which 15 hotel rooms he was expected to clean that day. Elias thought the number was a little light and that the estimated time it would take to clean them seemed a little long, but he figured that Susie was more knowledgeable about such things than he was. After Susie finished reading out the assignments, she gave the girls a refresher regarding the standard cleaning procedure at the resort. Elias listened to Susie's step-by-step instructions and gentle reminders, such as making sure to clean under the beds and to not forget to clean the water spots off the shower heads and bathroom drains. Susie finished with her instructions and let the girls responsible for cleaning the hotel rooms take hold of their cleaning carts. The girls assigned to clean the hotel rooms each took a cart and Elias followed behind them. He wheeled his cart towards the service elevator the maids used and waited for his turn to go up to the 7th floor that he was scheduled to work on. Elias got on the elevator and felt butterflies in his stomach as it ascended to the 7th floor. He wondered what the guests would say when they saw him. None of his co-workers saw anything strange about him, and Elias figured that the guests would pay him little if any attention. As the bell of the elevator dinged on the floor, Elias pushed his cart through the open elevator doors. Elias kept repeating the standard procedures for cleaning the rooms that Susie had told the girls in his head as he walked towards the first room. He knocked upon the door and heard no answer. He pushed in his keycard and pushed the cart through the doorway to the empty room. Elias approached the bed and pulled the balled-up blanket off the mattress. Elias lifted the heavy mattress and pulled the edge of the sheets out from underneath it before he walked to the other side of the bed and repeated his task. He then took the sheets off the bed and placed them in the hamper attached to his cart. With the sheets off the bed, Elias took new bed sheets from his cart and placed them on the bed before he removed the pillows from their pillowcases. Elias shook his head as he noticed that the bed contained 8 pillows, each requiring a pillowcase to be changed. "Who the hell needs 8 pillows?" Elias muttered as he pulled the first one out of its pillowcase. Elias put the used pillowcases into the hamper on his cart before he removed the fresh pillowcases and put them on each pillow. As he did so, Elias remembered Susie's instructions. He was careful to follow them to the letter as he made sure that the ends of the pillowcases were neatly tucked inside themselves. After finishing fussing with the pillows, Elias turned his attention to the top sheet of the bed and blanket he carefully covered the bed with. Elias then tucked the quilted blanket and top sheet under the edge of the bed. Elias looked at the clock in the room and was surprised by how long it had taken him to merely change the sheets and make the bed. He realized why the number of rooms the maids were each given to clean seemed so small to him as he shook his head. After pausing for a second, Elias took hold of the antibacterial cleaner on his cart and his dust rag and began to wipe down the 2 end tables on either side of the bed. He then proceeded to clean the dresser that rested beneath the flat-screen television on the wall. When Elias finished wiping down the dresser, he moved towards the desk and sprayed cleaner upon it. He wiped the desktop down before he moved his dust rag along the wooden arms of the desk chair. Elias then put the cleaner away and took out the items he would need to clean the bathroom. He started by scrubbing the tiles of the shower walls before he proceeded to clean the tub and the vanity mirror over the sink. After Elias finished with the mirror, he remembered Susie's direction to clean the water spots in the bathroom. Elias took hold of the polish on his cart and cleaned the faucet in the sink before he cleaned the shower handles, shower head and spout. Elias then turned his attention to cleaning the toilet and the floors. Elias took hold of his scrub brush and proceeded towards the toilet. As he knelt before it, he felt the coldness of the marble floor beneath his pantyhose covered the legs. The coolness felt good to him as he was starting to sweat despite the air conditioning in the room. As Elias scrubbed the toilet, he wondered what his wife was doing at that moment. He figured that she was probably still in bed or was eating breakfast with the other guests while he toiled in a stranger's hotel room bathroom. The thought aroused him and he felt his member poking at the back of his nude, control-top pantyhose. Elias smiled as he got to his feet and took hold of the materials he was going to wash the floor with. Elias got back onto his hands and knees and began to wash the floor. Elias figured beforehand that he would be doing so with a mop, but, as Susie reminded the girls that morning, the maids were required to clean it by hand as they were more likely do a thorough job that way. Elias could not argue with her logic as he cleaned the floor beneath him. As he moved about, he occasionally brushed his pantyhose against the wet floor and felt the wet feeling seeping through his nylons. While Elias did not particularly enjoy the feeling of wet pantyhose, it helped reinforce in his mind the reality of his situation. He was cleaning up for strangers and living out the role he had only pursued in the privacy of his own home with his wife up to that point. Elias smirked as he wiped the sweat off his brow with his arm and felt the edge of the blue latex glove that covered his hand. He stood up again and put the floor cleaning materials away before he took hold of the vacuum on the cart. He then plugged it in and made sure to vacuum the entire carpet, including under the bed. Elias finished vacuuming and checked the clock again. He was on schedule given the number of rooms he had to clean, but he was still surprised by how long it had taken him to clean the hotel room. As Elias went to push the cart out of the room, he sprayed room freshener behind him. The flowery scent made Elias smile as he closed the door to the room behind him. Elias then pushed his cart towards the next door before he knocked upon it. "What?" he heard someone shout from inside in a groggy voice. "Housekeeping," Elias replied in a small voice. "Go the fuck away," the man shouted back at him. Elias closed his eyes for a second as he struggled to hold his tongue and retort something obnoxious. Elias, however, knew that it was not his place to do so. He was expected to take the abuse in silence like any other hotel maid. Elias took a deep breath and proceeded in silence to the next room. The rudeness of the man in the prior room weighed on Elias's mind as he knocked upon the next door. Elias braced himself for another offensive statement, but his knock was met by a sunny request that he enter. Elias walked into the room and saw the man standing in the hotel bathroom dressed only in a towel while his female companion pulled at the hem of her striped, tunic cover-up dress as she stood and watched the television in the room. "Don't let us get in your way. We're just finishing up before we head down to breakfast," the man said as Elias tried to avert his gaze. "Do you need a moment?" Elias asked the man. "No. Go on. I'll just finish getting dressed in here." Elias nodded to the man as he approached the bed. The woman stood to the side as she waited for her husband to come out of the bathroom while Elias stripped the bed. By the time Elias finished with the bed, the couple had left the room. Elias felt more than a little relieved that they were gone. He had felt the woman's eyes upon him as he stripped and made the bed. He was hopeful that he did not do anything to expose his secret as he toiled in front of her. Just as with the first room, Elias then wiped down the dresser, end tables and desk in the room before he went into the bathroom where he cleaned the shower, faucets and toilet. He then got down on his hands and knees to clean the bathroom floor before he took out the vacuum and cleaned the bedroom area of the hotel room. As Elias finished cleaning the room, he checked off the boxes for the 2 rooms he had cleaned and the 1 room that had chosen to forego his cleaning services. Elias then pushed the cart out of the room and went to the next hotel room. He knocked upon the door and did not hear any voices inside. Elias ran his card through the card reader and pushed the cart through the door. As he did so, he heard a voice in the bathroom. Mariasela opened the door and smiled at her husband as she stood before him dressed in her floral print, one-piece swimsuit with a ruched front, a halter neckline and the matching skirt cover-up. Elias smiled at his wife's shapely form and wanted to take her then and there, but he knew that it was not his place that week. He simply smiled at her and said, "Hello, madam. I'm here to clean the room." "Oh, of course," Mariasela replied with a smile as Elias closed the door to the room behind him and decided to break from procedure and began to vacuum the rug first. Elias thought about the Spartan surroundings of his quarters as he went around cleaning the recently remodeled hotel room his wife was staying in. Unlike the painted cement floor of his quarters, her floor was covered by a carpet. Unlike his dank quarters, the room was bathed in light through the large windows that shined onto the beige floral-patterned wallpaper in the room. Mariasela smirked as she watched Elias vacuum the floors. As he finished, he turned to her and asked, "Is there anything you need?" "No, I just enjoy watching you work," Mariasela replied before she said, "You're doing a heck of a job," and patted him on his rear, feeling the tip of his erect member through his tights and dress. As Mariasela realized what she had felt, she started to giggle and took a seat on the chair in the room. Elias flashed a smile towards Mariasela as he made her bed for her. When he finished, Mariasela got up and laid down across the covers and propped herself up with her forearm as she watched while Elias dusted the desktop and end tables before he walked into the bathroom and began to clean the vanity. As he did so, Mariasela got up and walked over to him as she asked, "So are you liking it here?" "It's okay," Elias responded with a smile as he began tidying up her bathroom. Mariasela smiled down at him as she watched him cleaning the water spots on the faucet and asked, "Is this a little better than when you do it at home?" "It's a much different sort of thrill," Elias replied as he thought about the rush he felt at being seen en femme by so many people without drawing any unwanted attention to his true gender. Mariasela smiled and nodded before she walked away from the bathroom door to let him finish cleaning the toilet and scrub the floor. After he did so, he took hold of his cart. Mariasela stood up to see him out as she started to talk to him again as he opened the hotel room door. As he did so, Elias heard Susie in the hallway. Susie heard Elias reply to Mariasela and admonished him, "Elena, do not speak to the guests." "I'm so sorry, miss. This girl is new. She should know better, but..." Mariasela listened in stunned silence to Susie before she hastily interjected, "No. I spoke to your maid, not the other way around. I initiated it. She was just responding to me." Susie gave Mariasela an incredulous look, but Susie replied that she believed her as she could not correct a guest no matter how sure she was that she was being lied to. Susie nodded at Mariasela and said, "Okay. I'm sorry for bothering you, miss, but this maid has to get back to work." Mariasela smiled at Susie's words and nodded as she replied, "Of course, I wouldn't want to delay her." Elias put his head down as he walked towards the next hotel room on the floor as Mariasela headed for the elevator. Elias knocked on the door and entered when no response was heard. Elias cleaned the room and thought about Susie's admonishment of him in front of his wife. Elias was happy that his wife defended him even though he figured from Susie's response that he would be further admonished by her. Elias could never remember feeling more humiliated than he had been that morning when he was dressed down by a woman for talking to his wife. Elias realized that she was treating him like any other maid, which in her eyes, he was. The excitement Elias sensed his wife experiencing at hearing another woman describe him as just another maid made Elias wonder if their vacation at the resort would lead to further changes at home. While Mariasela knew that Elias had a strong submissive streak, Elias was sure that she was beginning to realize that it was even stronger than she expected. Elias realized that his wife likely knew how aroused he had gotten by being scolded while standing before her in a maid's dress. Elias hoped that it would not make his wife think any less of him. Elias then finished cleaning the hotel room before he cleaned a few more rooms. He then pushed his cart back towards the service elevator and went down to the basement where he met his co-workers for lunch. Elias instantly noticed that the food, much like at breakfast, was not of very high quality and was substantially blander than the food he was used to eating at the resort when he had stayed there as a guest. Elias knew that his finicky wife would never have eaten the food that was in front of him, but he realized that he had to eat it to maintain his strength for the rest of his long workday. While Elias ate lunch, he talked with some of the girls at the table. Most of the girls spoke limited English, so his conversations were not very deep before Isolina and Marta walked over to him. Elias said hello to his roommates that were easily the most English proficient maids in the resort besides himself. Elias told them about the rude man he had encountered. Isolina and Marta smiled as they explained that it was a daily occurrence for them and the other girls. Elias nodded as he listened to them and realized that he should not have been surprised by the man's response. When Elias told them about another man he encountered wearing only a towel, they began to laugh. "How long have you been doing this for?" Marta asked. "Why?" "Well, Susie said you were found abroad by Senora Castillo." "Yes, well, you never had a guy greet you naked?" Isolina asked with a laugh. Elias blushed as he shook his head. Isolina and Marta laughed as they explained what they were talking about to the two girls next to them in Spanish. The girls laughed and shook their heads too. Elias rubbed his neck as he asked, "I suppose I should expect to see that again at some point." Marta and Isolina nodded before Marta said, "Don't worry. By about the 10th time, you won't even blush anymore." Elias rolled his eyes as he replied, "I doubt that." "You're in the wrong business if you're a prude," Elias heard his wife's aunt say from behind him. Elias smiled as he replied, "I suppose you're right, Senora Castillo." Eva nodded as she walked away from him to go and speak to Susie, who was on the other side of the room. Elias finished eating his lunch shortly thereafter. Elias then proceeded back to his cart, which he wheeled towards the elevator and went back to the floor he was working on to continue cleaning the hotel rooms. Elias got off the elevator and approached another room. He knocked and entered it and cleaned the room without issue. As the afternoon continued on, Elias checked off each room he cleaned as his body grew increasingly weary from the repeated physical motions that wore on his joints. When he finished his last room, Elias's legs felt weary underneath as he leaned against the cart as he pushed it. Elias took the service elevator to the basement and put the cart away with the others. As Elias went to walk out of the area, Susie came over and asked, "Elena, can you please help the girls clean the lobby?" Elias groaned and grabbed his lower back and nodded as he replied, "Sure." Elias walked back to the service elevator and got off on the first floor. He walked to the lobby and saw two girls vacuuming the rug and wiping down the furniture. Elias asked if they needed help and the girl with the cleaner in her hand gave Elias a dust rag and told him to start to clean the furniture. After working beside them for a few minutes, they finished and returned to the basement of the building. They placed their cleaning supplies away and began to wash their hands before they joined the other staff members for dinner. As with the breakfast, Elias noticed how the staff members stuck together in cliques. Elias could sense that the hotel maids were the least respected amongst the staff, so he remained with hotel maids and ate alongside Annabelle, Marta and Isolina before they cleaned their plates and began to walk back to their quarters. The walk to the quarters seemed longer than he remembered as Elias felt his weary legs almost giving way underneath him. Annabelle, Marta and Isolina walked beside him, and he occasionally interjected into their conversation. Elias settled into his quarters with the girls. He took a shower and dressed in his nightgown. He talked with the girls a little bit before he decided to get to bed early. The 3 girls he shared a room with laughed at his weariness before they left to join some other staff members at a bar outside the resort's walls. The next morning, Elias got up and got ready for another day of work around the resort. He joined the girls for breakfast and waited for his assignment. He was sure that Susie would make him clean the hotel rooms again, but she instead assigned him to cleaning up the restaurant. Elias shook his head as he walked towards the restaurant that morning. He figured that he was given the assignment because of the conversation Susie caught him having with his wife. He knew that she was upset about it, and he figured that this was her way of punishing him. Elias walked into the restaurant and took out the vacuum. He carefully maneuvered around the tables as he cleaned around them and moved the chairs at each table to clean underneath them with a few other girls who were assigned to cleaning the common areas of the resort. After he finished cleaning the dining hall, Elias was sent to clean the restaurant's bathrooms. Elias took the cleaning cart out of the closet in the back room and wheeled it into the ladies' room. Elias took out the toilet brush and cleaner and entered the first stall. As he scrubbed the toilet, he heard voices approaching the bathroom door. Elias paid no attention to the muffled voices as he figured they were just some of the other workers in the restaurant. As Elias continued to bend over from the hip and clean the toilet, he heard a voice behind him say, "Oh, this is just priceless." Elias turned and stared at Eva, who began to laugh. Elias blushed as Mariasela started to chuckle at his unease while he stood over the toilet and looked back through the open stall door at them. Elias looked at Mariasela's well-rested and tanned face before he exited the stall and saw his own haggard-looking appearance in the mirror. Elias began to feel a familiar excitement as he realized that the differences between them were stark. While Mariasela was standing before him dressed in an above-the-knee, blue, lace tank dress with a rounded neckline and Gucci patent leather flat sandals with a T-strap, and wearing her diamond earrings, the engagement ring he gave her and a diamond bracelet, he was dressed in his maid's uniform, cheap canvas shoes and nylons. Mariasela had a Prada bag in her hands while he had a scrub brush and toilet cleaner in his. Eva smirked at Elias and asked, "Do you think you've gotten this out of your system?" Elias was unsure if he had, but his body was weary from his labors. Elias responded as he felt Eva wanted him to, "Yes, I think so." Eva smiled and said, "Well, you've got 4 more days here. A deal's a deal, right?" Elias nodded and said, "Of course, Senora Castillo." "Good. Now, we'll let you get back to your labors, girl." Elias nodded as Eva walked out of the bathroom. Mariasela smirked as she moved towards him and placed a kiss on the lips and said, "I can't wait to take you home, Elena." Elias nodded to her as she turned and walked out the door, leaving him to finish cleaning the bathroom before the morning breakfast rush.